The forge was a small sun in the belly of Winterfell, a steady glare held in a stone throat while the world outside went white and quiet. Hadrick drove the bellows with a calm foot and a craftsman's suspicion, breath misting into the warm draft, the anvil cool as a sleeping winter river. He liked the hour before dawn because the castle had not yet decided what sort of day it would be. A quarrelsome, gossiping day of footsteps and clanging buckets, or a thoughtful day with long silences in the yard and the careful counting of beans. The iron in his hands did not care either way. It cooled when left alone, softened when coaxed, and sang out its grievances one ring at a time. The black stone walls around him were furred with frost where the heat did not reach. Thin lines of winter crept like lace around the window and the door, wore themselves to water drops near the hearth, then turned to steam, then vanished. Hadrick liked the way the forge was always working, even when he was not. The place would take snow and make it air, take wood and make it coal, take ore and make it use. He was a man in that slow exchange, another tool the fire held and found worthy when it could. He lifted the bar, turned it, found its spine with the hammer, and watched the scale leap away in tiny black flakes. The iron told him with a dull, forgiving note that he had hit too far to the left. He shifted. The bar lengthened into something that might one day be a hinge. He thought of hinges when he woke, of hinges when he drank, of hinges when the wind scoured the outer yard and the ravens argued on the gatehouse merlins. A castle lived by hinges, doors that opened when asked and held tight when commanded. There was comfort in the thought. Hinges did not brag. Outside, he could hear a broom on flagstones, someone dealing with yesterday's footprint map so that today might begin in clean lines. Somewhere below, in the dark stone intestines, the hot springs grumbled. Winterfell was old and had learned not to creak, but it breathed. Hadrick sometimes thought of the place as a dog asleep by a hearth, one ear always turned toward any change. He was a bastard of the north, tall in the way that made men ask favors of you and few women lift their chins. The forge had gentled him, or at least taught him the use of gentleness, the quiet touches that saved work later, the small patience that broke no skins and yet bent iron. He wore his hair tied back because it made no sense to feed the fire anything it had not asked for. His mother, who had scrubbed floors with a will and laughed loudly when there was reason, had told him that a bastard needed no more difficulties than he was born with. Keep your hair short, keep your blade sharper. She was buried outside the walls under a round stone Hadrick had hammered into shape, flattening the world down to a circle because that was the best he could do. He visited her once a week, usually at dawn when the snow was empty of footprints. A handful of berries when there were berries, a pinch of flour when there was flour, and in winter only breath. The wind took what he didn't have words for. He finished the hinge bar and set it aside, turned a hook from a bit of scrap, and was working the last inch into a neat spiral when a shadow crossed his fire. He looked up to find Maester Ronald standing in the doorway, bundled like a parcel the ravens had delivered, gray hair beaded with melting snow. The maester looked like a dry branch someone had dipped in hoarfrost. He held a covered bundle with an odd stiffness, as though carrying a sleeping thing he didn't want to wake. "You're earlier than the ravens," Hadrick said, setting the hook down. His voice always came out rough in the morning. "Have they finally agreed to your letters, maester? Or do I need to make the ink a coal richer?" "Words go as slow as they need to," Ronald said, stepping into the warmth with a sigh a man makes when he has been cold too long, too often. "But I came for something that might move them. Lady Cerys would see you." Hadrick wiped his hands and took the bucket of snow by the doorway, rubbing his palms with it, letting the sting wake him. Now. He glanced at the bundle. Ronald's hands were careful upon it. "Is that for the kitchen?" "For your table," said a new voice, cool and precise. Lady Cerys Stark had a way of entering a space as if she had never been elsewhere in her life. She had grown into authority the way some trees grow into the wall they lean upon, until the wall bears their shape where the bark pressed. She wore no jewels, only the wolf worked into her cloak's clasp, and her hair was bound in a simple knot that showed her neck to the cold. She looked at nothing in the forge with wonder. She looked at everything with inventory. Maester Ronald is not given to dramatics, but even he has been walking as if his sandals were 2 sizes too small. I prefer to alleviate discomfort when it is useful to do so. Hadric felt his neck dip with a reflex that had nothing to do with respect, and everything to do with the way the Stark line looked at you as if measuring your use and finding you adequate. He liked that about them. Better to be useful than loved, in a place where winter took its due without asking. "My lady," he said. "Lock the door," she answered. "I don't need the whole of Winterfell wandering through a moment I have not yet decided how to share." Hadric slid the bolt and turned back to them. The forge seemed suddenly smaller, the fire's breath a little louder. Winterfell's small sun burned stolidly while the world collected around it. "Open it," Cerys told the maester. Ronald set the bundle on Hadric's workbench. The cloth was older than either of them and had been mended by someone who liked neatness for its own sake. The maester's knuckles were pale on the knot. He untied it and folded the cloth back. The shards lay in the fold, dull with time, black-watered like the inside of a RA. Ven's wing, not iron, not steel he had seen often, but a kind that made the breath flatten in the chest and the throat tighten before one could help it. Hadric had seen 2 Valyrian blades in his life, once on the hip of a man who had passed through Wintertown on his way to a lord's hall, and once in a lord's hand at a feast when the wine was good and the men were foolish. Those had been whole and quiet and made everything around them seem less true. These were broken and still made the forge feel like a lesser flame. "Where?" Hadric asked, without planning to. "Did you pull these from?" "The crypts," said Lady Cerys. Her eyes didn't leave his face when she said it. She did not look at the metal. She looked at the man being asked to touch it. Under a king who had no crown when he died and no sons. The sword lay with him and went to ruin with him. Our line has had cause to dig more graves than most, and we have made mistakes when we chose where to set our feet. This is one I intend to correct." Hadric reached out with no more reverence than he gave a hinge, because reverence made hands clumsy. He picked up the largest shard. It was heavier than it looked. A black ripple ran along its length like the shadow of a current under ice. He rubbed a thumb along the fractured edge. The break was not a rent. It had the clean, evil neatness of a decision. Lines marched through the blade like grain in fine wood, interrupted and misaligned at the break. He smelled old oil and old blood. Fingers before him had kept it as well as they were able. He could not guess how many winters had sat on this metal. He could guess that what had broken it had been more than an accident. He listened to the shards might have been, the way he listened to all broken things. The blade did not speak. It did not need to. It had presence the way a cold does, inevitable, indifferent. Those who made it had coaxed pattern into the steel. Ripples caught light and changed their mind about it. The broken edge had cooled unevenly. A hairline of decay ran toward the stamped mark near the guard end like a vein under a wrist. He held it closer to the forge's glare and saw that the stamp had once been a wolf's head, tiny, dissatisfied, hammered in shallow by a northern hand too poor to afford a better die. The pride of it made the cheapness less simple. "You told me there was nothing left down there that might help the living," Ronald said softly, as if to himself. Cerys' mouth tilted. "I told you there was nothing left for you to meddle with where the dead might find offense. Are your feelings always so quick to consider themselves the center? It must be hard to be a maester and a man." Ronald shivered, and not from cold. "My lady," Hadric set the shard down with all the care he had. "You bring me trouble. I bring you work," she answered. "The trouble is mine, and the fate of the thing is the North's. There are new fires moving in the world, Hadric. Old names are being said again and old debts called. It pleases me to prepare while the next storm still has the courtesy to be far off. You want it mended?" He did not ask because they would not have brought it otherwise. "I want it reforged," Cerys said. "Not mended, not soldered like a broken pan. That would insult it. We are not a house that stitches what ought to be born anew. I have a belief I can test now, thanks to the small gods of timing. There will be a dragon in my yard before the month is over." Hadric looked up at her, then at the maester, who looked at the floor because looking at Hadric would betray his glee too easily. "A dragon," Hadric repeated. Because sometimes saying a word aloud taught you whether you were a fool. Wife to fire, Sarai said. Sibling to ash. We do outrageously practical things in the north. Let the south write of it as legend. I mean to use it as a tool. Hadric looked at the shards and saw not their break but their lines. The way their veins might be coaxed to run again as one. Steel had a memory if you listened to it. Heat taught it, hammer reminded it, the quench fixed it in its lessons like cold water fixes a face in a mirror. But this was Valyrian steel, and the memory in that kind was a different animal. It remembered blood. It remembered words spoken in art and malice. He wondered whether his hammer could speak that language or only mimic its mouth shapes. And if it balks? He asked. Then we name it stubborn and let it sit under the cold earth unmade. And I lose no more sleep than I already planned to, Sarai said. But if it can be done, if we can make our dead's tools serve our living again, then the north goes into the next winter with its hands less empty. He knew better than to ask why him. There were men in White Harbor and Gulltown who called themselves Smith and had hands soft enough to prove it. There were bladesmiths who traveled with caravans and took their payment in whispers about their skill. But Winterfell had always liked to reach into its own pockets and has found there a bastard who had learned to listen to hot things. He touched the large shard again. The fire made a low growl, as if it had decided to be a dog after all. What else? He asked, and knew the answer would have teeth. The gods, said the maester, before Sarais could. Or what passes for them among those who prefer trees to books. Your education was expensive but not wasted, Sarais said. There are ways in the old cold to make a thing remember itself. Men say our swords were tempered once in pools that bore witness. We have such a pool. We have trees that look back at you when you look at them. If Dragonfire can make the steel think again of its first shape, I believe the gods can remind it of to whom it belongs. Hadric's skin prickled. He was a practical man. He believed in proof and pins and in tapping a thing 3 times before trusting it. He believed also in the way a god's wood could make you forget your own name if you went there with the wrong questions. Who will breathe? He asked, because some questions you cannot hesitate with. And will it listen? The princess says it listens to her well enough, Sarais answered. We will see whether it listens to me at all. There is no harm in asking, unless you speak like a fool. I do not intend to. Hadric looked at the maester. And you mean to watch with all your rings and tell us if we are doing it wrong? I mean to record, Ronald said, and to keep you from burning down my library if the dragon forgets its manners. Also to stand some paces back. I am very fond of my skin. Then we will need a place to heat, Hadric said, moving his hand in a map only he knew. Not here. The roof will go, and with it the pigeons, and theirs is a gossip I do not want to encourage. The God's Wood has water and quiet. It has eyes as well, but there is nothing to be done about that. We build a trench of stone where the dragon can put its fire and where I can take what I need. We devise a way to draw that heat without letting it run. We set stones where they will not crack, and we keep the old tree's roots from taking offense. If I am to swing a hammer under the heart tree, my lady, I would like its consent. Consent from a tree, Ronald muttered, but no louder than would keep his eyebrows. Sarai's smile was only for herself. There are older ears than ours there. Ask what you need to ask. I will ask what I must. The princess will arrive in 4 days if the wind is with her. Men say dragon wings make their own weather. I am not so romantic as to believe it, but the wind goes where it's bid often enough when power speaks. Ronald, leave the bundle. Hadric, look and tell me what to do first. He watched them go, then rebolted the door and stood for a time with his hands on either side of the shard like a man explaining himself to the space between his own palms. He washed his face with snow. He put on his cloak and went to the Godswood. Winterfell's Godswood was old in a way that made even the stone defer. The hot springs fed the pool until steam coiled under the red hands of the heart tree. Green clung where it had no business clinging, ferns and mosses and the stubborn little weeds that did not know when to stop. The heart tree stood with scars like a face told a joke it did not understand. When the wind passed, The cut eyes watched Hadrick with the same indifference the blade had. He stood under it and felt the weight of it make the back of his neck want to bend. Kella, he said, though no one had named that name and said it here. It was the name old women wore when they had outlived their children, when they had served 3 ladies and stitched the mouth of grief shut with their simple work. He had not asked for advice, but he had never left this place without being given some. The woman came out of the mist as if she had been waiting in it. She was not small, though old, and her hair had the pollened gray of rushing water. She carried a basket full of fallen leaves, red as tongues. There were 3 stones in the bottom of the basket, smooth and warm. He noticed and did not know how he noticed. She set the basket down. "You bring a hot thing where the tree keeps memory cool," she said. "That's a choice and not a mistake. It will notice the difference." "I'd ask leave," Hadrick said. He kept his eyes on the trunk. Polite. Not looking was a kind of courtesy here. The face carved in it saw you even if you chose not to see back. "I would borrow warmth from a beast and skill from it as well, and I would give that into a place that perhaps is not meant to hold it. I would do it because the north will be colder in years coming, and I would like our hands full." Kella came close enough to smell the bread she always smelled of. "Borrowing from a beast will never be the sum of what you do. Fire does not lend without interest, but the tree is not offended by tools. It is offended by theft. Men have come with axes. Men have come with knives. Some men come with a mouth. The worst are the mouths. What you do will make noise and not words. It may be that the noise the steel makes will pass for prayer. And if I am not the voice it will listen to, then a lady will speak, and if the lady is not enough, then a wolf will walk by, and if the wolf does not walk, the snow will have its say. You are not the only mouth here." "And the dragon?" Hadrick asked quietly. "I have not seen one. More men die of fevers than of flames, and so we learn more about how to lower fevers. But now a beast comes with a heart like a kiln. What do I ask of it? That its belly be turning toward full," Kella said, dry as old sticks. "A hungry flame wanders too far. Tell it true, you ask it to do what it does anyway, with more grace. Fire knows how to be grace if pushed. A dragon will do what it thinks it does best. Be careful it does not decide to teach you to be small. Also, do not look it in the eye if you do not want to learn your place." Hadrick exhaled. "You sound as if you've seen them. I sound as if I was born in a world that remembers things you are asking the world to remember again. And when you cut, do not cut the tree. People like to take a chip for luck. This tree has no use for luck." He looked up at the carved face because sometimes it was worse not to. The rawwood color in the mouth's cut had long since gone black, as if it had drawn the words of years into itself and let them rot there. He could hear droplets falling into the pool, and each splash had the shape of a thought. He put his hand against the bark. The tree was surprisingly warm. "Consent?" he said, not certain he meant prayer. "We ask it." The wind lifted some leaves into motion. One fell on his shoulder and stayed there as if content to be a part of the conversation. Kella made a small noise, the sort one makes when a child finally sleeps after an argument about bedtime. "That will do," she said. "Bring stone. Yes, that won't split, and make a circle that listens. A circle tells the fire where to go. Take 3 steps from the pool and 2 from the roots and start there. And you'll need bellows, and you're a fool if you try to stand the dragon in one place. Build it low. Dragons like to crouch. What you're making is a mouth for a mouth. Don't let them touch teeth." The days that followed became a map of simple tasks that added up to trouble. Hadrick moved with the aim of a man who woke, counted his fingers, and went to it. Stonemasons muttered and did as he asked. He chose river stones with the maester's help. Ronald had a good eye for what water had rounded to endure. They lined a trench in the godswood where fallen leaves wouldn't blow into it. They hauled the portable anvils with a pair of oxen who did not like the smell of the godswood and liked less the sound of men bickering over how to tie a knot. Hadrick built a frame of green wood for bellows and fashioned the bellows from oiled leather, wide enough to coax draft through a trench that could swallow a man. A blacksmith thinks in lungs, he measured by breath. He made a lid of plates and rods that could slide, to hold heat and not hold it long enough to offend a tree. He would draw at the nearest end, heat his work under the plates, and let Dragonfire make the sun where the forge had made only day. He slept poorly, because men came and asked questions and then went away shaking their heads. He did not mind the questions. He minded the way they asked as if this were some play. Winterfell did not often host plays. He stood over the trench at dusk and listened for the thing he could not hear yet. The long slide of air across the stone when the dragon would breathe into it. On the fourth day, the smell of the sky changed. Ronald tasted it and cleared his throat too often and sent meandering boys to run messages to men who were already standing in their places. A dragon does not require introduction, but men like to pretend they have been told early. The yard filled with those who could plausibly claim to be walking somewhere else in the right direction. Wintertown emptied onto the downs, the people looking up with their mouths ready to shout surprise that would sound like prayer if you didn't know them. Hadrick stood under the arch to the inner yard, because he did not think himself the sort of man to stand in the center of anything while the sky spoke. He felt the first rush of the dragon in the soles of his feet before he heard it. The world makes a certain tone when something larger than your understanding moves through it. Balconies filled. Men lifted children. The children did not squirm. Silence gathered, fat as a guest who knows he is welcome. Vesperix dropped out of the cloud with sheets of snow stuck to her wings and shrugged them off the way a horse shakes its mane. She was the color of storm water and coal, with the pale undersides of a gull and a throat that looked like armor until it moved. Her head was too clever by far, with gold-seeing eyes and scars around the horns as if she had pressed her face into the wrong spaces too often. She came down like a landslide made patient and crouched with her claws digging into the yard's hard-packed snow, steam rising from her belly into the winter as if delighted to find it. On her neck, in high saddle and cold composure, sat Princess Meryl Targaryen. Hadrick could not tell at first if she was beautiful, because she was authority first and composition later. Pale hair, yes. Silver in summer candlelight would have been a soft joke about her house. But in this winter glare it was a hard line like a knife. Her face was fine and had learned not to show you its work. Her hands were steady on leather unbothered by dragon sweat. They let the dragon be admired. That was a courtesy and perhaps a lesson. Vesperix hissed once. It made beards stiffen. Men swallowed whom the dragon had not even looked at. It tasted the air the way any beast does when bored and then turned its head toward the godswood. The yard breathed again. Meryl slid from the saddle as if gravity had written contracts with her ankles. She did not look around to make certain all eyes were on her. They were. Her cloak hung too lightly to matter. She walked through men as if they were columns she had helped design. Cerys met her near where the old keep throws its shadow like a companion. "Princess," Cerys said, "your papers are in order. I do not often admit strange beasts to my yard. If you were a merchant, he would be asked for his license to offend my eye. You bring me a creature that offends my sky. What use can I make of them both? Your yard will be warmer for a time," Meryl said evenly, "and your sky will remember it was meant to bear weight. You are gracious to summon me to your tree. I would see what bears witness to your house, and I have brought you some of my own witness. She is peevish when she is not fed. Have you a cow to spare?" That sly courtesy made men lean to listen more closely. Cerys waved a hand, and the steward who smelt always of onions and records barked orders. Hadrick found his feet moving with the rest into the godswood. Vesperix padded behind like a rumor you could not shake, every step pushing heat into the air. She kept her head where she could see the heart tree and the people around it and the sky neither one eye nor two too far. Hadrick saw the way she kept 3 claws lifted from time to time. You can tell a beast's mood by how many points of contact it's willing to surrender. He showed them the trench and the plates and the bellows. Meryl looked where he pointed and nodded once in each place where his thinking pleased her and once where she thought to disagree later. She had Smith's hands, though they were clean, strong and flat-palmed and unafraid to touch something that might bite. He showed her the cradle he had made for the largest shard. She put her finger near it and did not touch. Yell. Ike that about her at once. Those who must always touch are either boys or kings. and even the generous gods have only so much patience for those. It will pull like a tooth, she said. The heat you ask for comes all at once. It will want to run. The plates will help. I can feather it. She is old enough to know more than one heat. Feather it? Ronald murmured, writing with his charcoal. Do dragoners call it that? If it pleases you to write it, Meryl said, not unkindly, then we call it that. My father used to say the names we give our craft should be comfortable in the mouth. If you must spit when you say them, you will forget them when you are thirsty. Wise, Ronald said, almost apologetically, as if wisdom were a private vice. Cerise unwrapped the larger shard herself. She did not pass it to Hadrick. She set it into the cradle and met the eyes of the heart tree as if that were a habit of hers. We ask, she said, voice assigning duties rather than humbling itself. We ask to be precise, so that we will not be had by imprecision later. We ask to borrow fire because it is there. We ask to make a thing whole so it can serve, and not because it is pretty. Pretty will have its say, Kella said, nowhere and then there. She set her basket of leaves near the root and ran a hand along the bark the way a woman calms a dog. Make your circle. I've brought the stones that keep a fire honest. You'll set them thus and thus, and you will put your heavy words into the water when you are done. Why water? Ronald asked. Because if you put them somewhere else, they'll wander back under the door like a stray, Kella said, and Hadrick thought that answer better than most that dressed themselves up for university. He took the first heat off the trench when the plates were hot enough to faint a breath back at his face. He heated the cradle where the shard waited. He lifted his hammer and did not bring it down yet. The whole world was one long in-breath. The dragon watched the way a cat watches a mouse that has chosen to be stoic. Now, Cerise said. Meryl spoke a word Hadrick didn't know and then another that made his knees want to bend. The sound she made wasn't the thing that happened. Her voice merely told the thing where to go. Vesperix lowered her head to the trench and exhaled. Not a roar. Not a flare that made boys clap without meaning to. A long, dense wind of heat that did not show itself until it had kissed stone. When orange crawled up what it touched like moss remembering a rock. The plates held the light in, turning the trench's mouth into a line of gold on a winter map. Hadrick felt the heat in his eye corners and in the small of his back and on the palms of his hands. He stepped into it the way one steps from shore into river. He drew it through the bellows, and the trench changed tone, and the plates sang like a finger on glass. He brought the cradle down and into the mouth of that hot breath, and the shard changed its mind about the world. The black ripples caught fire. The clean break glowed like a truth you can't unhear. Feather, Meryl said lightly. Vesperix obeyed, deepening the tone, the heat a touch thicker. The heart tree watched, eyes as blank as law. Hadrick moved the shard, slid the bright line where the break would be, and pressed the edges together in the heat's demand. He felt the old thinking in the steel wake like a sleeper unimpressed with being shaken. The lines in the metal wanted to run as they had, to rejoin their own. He heard it in the way the metal spoke under the hammer. Not the dead ring of correction, not the hollow bang of persuasion, but the sweet high chime of something that remembered joy and consented unwillingly because the argument made sense. He struck and struck again, and each blow counted. Sweat ran into his mouth and tasted like tin. Men moved closer without knowing they did. Ronald's charcoal made a soft, anxious rasp. Cerise stood with her hands behind her back and did not blink more often than she always had. Meryl moved the dragon's mouth up and down the trench by inches, as if she were shading a wall with light. Now, Kella said, as if counting a slow dance. Now you ask, not by words. Words are for men in halls. Ask by doing. Hadrick lifted the shard and set the edges to the light again, and when he struck this time, he named in his mind each Stark he could remember, because it seemed like an honest thing to hand the metal a list of those who would ask of it. He had not known many. He had known the dead better than the living. Winterfell puts the dead in order and makes certain you learn the list. He saw their stone faces as he hammered and found that his arm did not tire. He saw his mother among them because why not? He put Kella in the line as well because the tree would allow humor. The break closed. The seam glowed and dulled and glowed again, and in that turn there was hope. The lines in the blade found each other as if called by name. Hadrick lowered his hammer and breathed. Merrill eased the fire like a woman eases a child into sleep. The plates went from white to orange to sullen cherry. Hadrick stepped back. "Quench," Kella said. Hadrick set his hands where he had meant to someday. He lifted the blade with tongs, and he and Cerise walked together to the pool. He could feel the blade complaining about letting go of its heat. He could feel his hands complaining about nothing at all because duty makes hands quiet. The steam rose. He saw the wet brown grace on the ice where leaves had fallen and sunk. He held the blade and did not yet lower it because he was a man who liked to have his one small conversation with a thing before he drowned it. "Now," he said, and Cerise cut her palm with a small knife, neither pretty nor ceremonial, and let the blood fall in a sheet into the water. The red pierced the reflection like a word you wish you had not heard, and the pool took it and did not answer. Hadrick lowered the hot net. Al into the cold witness. The gods would went quiet in a new way. Sounds were there, they always were, drips and the shift of creatures and the worry of men. But there is a quiet under a quiet that sometimes steps out of a tree and stands alongside you. Hadrick heard nothing else. The water hissed, but as if being polite about it. Steam rose in lambswool curls, made old men's beards out of young faces. The blade shook once. He held it and asked nothing more of it, and did not tell it to be brave because that was why they were both there. When the hiss stopped, he lifted it, and the water ran down it and was made little jewels by the winter. He did not see his face in the metal, though the ripples caught light. He saw, for a moment, sheaves of pale lines running like the tracks of wind in snow. He saw a dark river under it. He saw his mother's hand on his head, which was strange because she did not often put that hand there. He blinked, and the blade was metal in his hand. Nothing else. "Heat again," he said, "because a smith is a man who knows that one thing is never yet enough." They brought it back to light. He tempered it. They set it aside to think. He found his throat dry and the maester's skin papery on his elbow, as if the man needed to be certain he was not alone in having seen something that might not have been there. "What did it feel like?" Ronald asked, writing already, his charcoal eager. "Like driving a cold nail through warm wood," Hadrick said, the first words that would do. "Like being watched by something that wasn't angry yet." "Good," Kella murmured. "The tree does not like being a hearth. But if the purpose is clean, it will not spit smoke." They worked until the light bleeded gray through the clouds and the courtyards emptied and the kitchen sent someone with oatcakes that had cooled in the walk and tasted only of function. They slept, and sleep made shape of some of what they had done and rubbed away the edges of the parts the mind would not be held to. In the days that followed, the work became a kind of worship that no one named worship because they were not fools enough to say it aloud. Hadrick ground the blade where it needed to accept itself. Merrill's dragon feathered heat until he could feel the degrees of it in his gums. Ronald went hoarse and then stopped talking, finding that his page could bear witness to more than his voice. Cerise bled again at the second quench and did not make a mouth about it. Kella brought more stones and set them in the places women know to be thresholds. They learned the dragon's moods the way one learns a river's, by stepping in and being pushed, by remembering where the bottom drops away, by not scolding it for being water. Vesperix liked to be scratched where the scales turned softer at the place where wing met back. She liked it but pretended not to. She would lower her head when Hadrick spoke to her in the tone he used for horses. He did not touch her eye. He did not want to know what place her eye thought to put him. There were politics because men cannot breathe winter without deciding who should exhale first. A lord from the Bar-Rolands came and made a mouth about the wickedness of tree prayers and southern witchcrafts, and Cerise sent him away with wine and no argument because the best way to starve a fire is to deny it tinder. The steward worried about the expense of stones, and Hadrick returned 2 bags of nails to the storehouse because men who have always counted things get peace from being given the number 4 when they thought it lost. Wintertown drank stories in the inns, and a child near the yard door called Vesperix Old Grey, and was gently scolded for not including my lady in the phrase. On the 5th evening, Hadrick sat in the forge alone, his hands idle for the first time since the dragon had come. The wind put its shoulder to the door, and he grunted because pressure sometimes demands noise. He set the reforged blade on the anvil where light could stroke it without attention. It was not whole. It was something new that had made a truce with its own past. He traced the pattern with his eye and saw the frostwork caught in the blackness, curving shapes that would look tutored to anyone who'd ever walked a field that had frozen under wind. The seam where the break had been was a hair, and that hair looked like a river from far away. He thought of naming. Men thought names changed things. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they just made the thing easier to point at. He turned the blade and saw his face and felt uneasy because his face was an accident and the blade was a culmination. He thought of his mother and then refused to make the steel carry her name because he would not put her on the end of a killing stick. He thought of the heart tree and decided not to insult it by giving a tree a name that was not its own. Names would come later, like birds. Better to leave a blade naked until it chose its clothes. The door opened without knocking. The dragon's heat came first, then the woman's. Meryl stepped into the forge with her cloak undone and the wet gleam on her boots that said she had walked where the steam turned to beads. She did not ask leave to come in because she had already made herself part of this place by watching, by working. He did not ask her to go out because he was not a man too proud to accept company when the night was doing its work. "How do you make your peace with everything that looks to you for form?" she asked, scrutinizing the blade with an absence of hunger that was almost hunger. Its arrogance dressed as labor. "I should know. I work similar cloth." "It doesn't look to me for form," Hadrick said. "It looks to itself. I'm only handing it a mirror and saying, 'Here, remember your mouth.'" She smiled without showing teeth. "You're more poet than your hands suggest." He shrugged. "A man needs a trick to keep thinking from breaking him. Words are small tricks, and if a hammer is a trick, so be it." She walked her fingers along the blade, not touching. "Men in my father's halls like to say that Valyrian steel remembers. It remembers heat, remembers shape. I have always thought memory requires shape to begin with. Otherwise, you are just a feeling afraid of itself. My house had pride in thinking heat alone was enough. In this, I am happy to be shown wrong." He let the words sit and made a small noise when they were done sitting. "The gods would like you," he said. She laughed softly. "How can you tell when a tree likes you? When you leave it and it doesn't pull something of you with it. When you do not feel you owe it thanks after you have only been in its shadow. When you go to piss before bed and there is not a leaf stuck to your boot somehow." She laughed again, more loudly. He liked it. He liked that she could find laughter. "I gave it a thing," she said after. "Not blood. A story. A story that we do not tell for fear of making it true. I set it to the tree to make it smaller. It seemed to hold it well enough." He did not ask the story. He turned the blade. "Tomorrow we draw the fuller," he said. "If the steel listens again. I want it to sing when it cuts air. If rightly done, it will be light as a boast and twice as sharp." "Do you believe in the thing that makes this blasphemy?" she asked. "I don't put belief into words," Hadrick said, and saw in her face that she understood because she had the same habit. "I put belief into work. The words come later to please the men who need them." She looked into the fire as if it were a lake she could walk on. "My father taught me the words too early," she said. "I learned to think obedience was a story. It is not. It is a decision you must make each time you are asked, and if you make it too often it begins to think it owns your mouth. I love my father. He loved me like a hammer loves a nail. Then he built well," Hadrick said, "because men are allowed to be sentimental about fathers when they only exist in the mouth of someone else." Her eyes found his face. "Who taught you?" "My mother and my own mistakes," he said. "The one forgave me my faults. The other did not. I learned more from one, felt better for the other." "Your lady is not foolish," Meryl said. "She called me for this and not for pageantry. She asked me for work and gave me a yard free of idiots. That is rare. In the South, there are a profession's worth of idiots, and they all hold candles to help the important people see their own hands more clearly. Lady Cerise has the good fortune to find idiots itchy," Hadrick said. "She scrubs her halls often. I should like a word with a stark tree when it is not busy tolerating my dragon, Merrill said, and looked toward the god's wood until the look went into the wall like water. They stood in a quiet that was not unfriendly. He ran soft cloth along the blade's length and listened for the sound it made. The blade made a noise like the inside of your head when you try to remember a tune. Merrill watched him the way a hawk watches a man with meat. Will you let me hold it? She asked finally. He put the hilt in her hand before the question had fully left her mouth. He had not decided to. He only knew whom it was for. The blade sat in her palm as if it had been waiting for it and was now content. She lifted it with the competence of someone who refused to be bad at anything anyone could see. She stepped back and cut a shape in the air with restraint, not daring to wake something in the steel that might not be willing to be woken in a forge. She nodded once, a clean little phrase of satisfaction. Again tomorrow, she said, and a little more. The old songs like to pretend that making a thing is a single day's arrogant flair. It is not. It is the day after that, and the day after, until the thing is so tired of you it becomes itself just to be rid of you. The saboteur came on the 6th day. Hadric would later learn his name and forget it on purpose, because he was a man who preferred to remember the shapes of good work more than the shapes of bad men. But at the time he was simply a small patience in a larger plan, a figure slipping from shadow to shadow in a place where the shadows were few. He put a handful of iron filings into the oil and then into the water bucket, thinking to spoil the temper, and he loosened a pin on the bellows clutch so that the draft would stumble at a delicate moment. He was careful. He had the wisdom of men who think themselves clever. He did not know the smell of iron filings in oil. He did not know that Hadric's foot would find a new rhythm the instant a pin changed its mind. The sabotage failed in the way that most ill intentions fail in the north. He had not counted the number of times a bastard had had to compensate for a pin that wished for an easier day. The gods would saw him and kept his face. It would return his likeness to him when it had use of it. Trees keep ledgers too. Hadric drew the fuller until the blade's spine seemed to lift itself out of the metal. He felt the weight shift in his hands the way a child changes when it wakes and becomes itself again. Merrill breathed Dragonfire into the plates with the gentleness of a scribe turning a page. Cerai's blood made red threads in the pool, and the water did not rise to scold. Kella set 3 stones on the roots in a corner where the unwary would never think to look. They rang when the dragon exhaled, so softly that Hadric would hear them only in his teeth. At night the 3 of them, Smith, Princess, Lady, sat with a pot of stew that an indifferent kitchen had sent and a heel of bread and some cheese wrapped in wax with the humility of decent cheese. They did not talk about the South. They did not talk about the long night that old men always brought into rooms like their favorite guest. They talked about the way hands learn and the way work makes a person's shadow longer. They talked about the names of stars. Merrill told them what a dragon looks at when it thinks no one is looking. Cerais told them how many sacks of rye make a winter less frightening. Hadric told them about hinges. He spoke about hinges until they laughed, and he laughed at himself and felt less alone than a bastard often allows himself. On the 8th day they saw the wolf. It moved at the edge of the godswood where snow fell differently because the leaves took the weight and made the air hold it longer. Pale, too big to be ordinary, walking with the arrogance of a thing that had been given permission by the first snowfall and had never been revoked. It did not snarl. It did not lower its head. It looked at the blade where it lay on the stones between heats and then at Hadric and then at the heart tree. It did not appear to care about the dragon, which was a kind of insult only a wolf could give a creature like that. Vesperix narrowed her eyes and permitted the insult because there are old contracts even dragons do not tear up in a fit. Kella inclined her head in acknowledgement. Cerais closed her eyes for a long blink that made her look for a heartbeat like a girl. The maester forgot to write. Hadric found that for once he did want that religious feeling that rises in men who stand under too much sky. He did not reach for it. The wolf finished its survey, marked the trunk of a birch with the honest practicality of beasts, and went on. If the godswood had been a hall, the wolf would have been a lord who had showed his face to prove to his bannermen he was not poisoned. Good, Kella said. Now it is a pack work. What does that mean? Ronald asked, hesitant now, his voice a visitor in a room occupied by older guests. "It means you were warned to stop if you intended mischief," Kella said without moving her mouth very much. "It means our work has been seen by those who will consider whether it serves more than one mouth." They did not speak of it more. Work makes good silences when men and women are wise enough to let them be. The saboteur came again the next night and could not help himself in a way that made Hadric pity him in advance. He set slate chips under one of the stones near the trench so that it would rock and shift when weight went on it. He smeared resin on a handle until it would turn and leave a hand in air at the wrong moment. He stood up too fast when a lean pale shape passed a yard away and caught his breath on his own teeth. The gods would noted what panic sounds like. The wolf did not change its pace. In the morning, Hadric found the slate chips by the sound the stone made when he tested it with his heel. He pulled them out and put them into his pocket and did not tell anyone because he was interested in how a man would react when his mischief failed. He sanded the resin off the handle and sent that handle to the kitchen to stir stew for men whose hands had not been built to hold blades. He put a new handle on and found he liked the shape it made in his grip better than the old one. Sabotage had improved the work. It happens. They drew the blade out of the plates and set it on the anvil for the final temper on the 10th day. 10 is a number men like. It has fingers to count on. Hadric let the fire speak where it needed to and then drowned what did not. The blade's surface flashed with light under the forge's breath, the ripples switching from night to day and back hours in the span of a blink. He ran oil over it, clean and clear and smelling faintly of rosemary because Kella said that it pleases iron to be reminded of green once in a while. He rubbed until his hands weren't hands for anything else. "Try it," Sarai said, "and there are orders that sound like gifts and gifts that sound like orders." This was both. Hadric cut test straw in the yard where the fruit trees would later have the courtesy to be bothered by summer. The blade made more a whisper than a sound. It told the straw it was over, and the straw agreed. He cut a hanging length of cloth and it parted without complaint, both pieces turning in the air as if they could not remember ever having been joined. He asked the blade to find a thin shaving of wood. It found it, and the shaving came away from the stick like a ribbon at a wedding, which pleased him even though he did not care for weddings. He brought it back to the godswood because he had meant at the start to finish where he had begun. Meryl took it and cut once, twice, as if writing a name she refused to say. Sarai did not take it. She did not hold such things often, and she knew it. Kella touched the flat with two thick fingers and closed her eyes as if listening to bees. "Do not name it yet," she said. "Let it earn its noise. Names come cheap to those who need them. Let the deed put salt into its own bread." They ate in the hall that night, though Hadric would have preferred a corner of the forge and quiet. It was good for them to sit where the eyes were more than the bowls. Men and women watched the princess and the lady nod as if they were two millers who had decided the grain's work was honorable. Men and women watched the bastard smith sit near them and speak when spoken to, and it taught them something they did not know about how some things break and become able to carry more weight when they are made again. The stew was better. Wine came. Ronald told a silly story about a knight who couldn't get his helmet off to drink and had to pour wine through the visor slit. And they laughed because it is good to be reminded that men who walk like gods have ungainly mouths as well. Vesperix sang once in the courtyard. No fire, just that long grinding note that makes the stone remember volcanoes. Birds rose from the rookery like thrown snow. Children forgot to be scolded. Then quiet returned with its sleeves rolled. Hadric dreamed the blade on his mother's stone the 7th night. He woke with his hand on the hilt and the dark insisting it had been there all along and did not require his commentary. He walked in the cold to the grave and stood there until the wind had stolen enough of his body heat that he could think again. He did not leave the blade. He returned it to its place in the forge and put away the dream with the other ones he kept in the drawer where the cracked hammers lived. Things too honest to throw away and too odd to use. On the 12th day, the saboteur tried to break the last moment with something simple and cruel. He cut the lashings on the sled that would take the blade to the yard for the final presentation. Men will sit quiet while you transform the world and will trip you on the last step because they hate being reminded that things can be completed. Hadric saw the cut when balance shifted. He had shoulders that remembered the weight of a sword and a sled, and he knew when a thing is lying even before it falls. He braced and brought the blade back down with his hands and his back, and a sound he did not make with his mouth. The saboteur ran because running is what a body does when the heart is only useful to wolves. The wolf came out of the godswood and was suddenly there on a drift, big as a memory of fear, and looked at the running man until he forgot to move his feet the right way. Men with more authority and less economy dragged him, yelling the things men yell when they have been shown a man is less than the shape he wore. He wept. He said things about sorcery and women and trees and the shape of the world as he liked it and how this work had offended it. He was not brave. He did not deserve to be. Sarais told them not to hurt him and then told them where to put him and what to feed him and when to let him go. The wolf blinked and went away. That was the worst of it, that the world did not care more than exactly enough. They put the blade in the hall without naming. They set it on hooks on the wall where it would see bowls and hands and the ordinary days it would live among. That, too, is a kind of temper. Hadric worked hinges again as if nothing had changed, because hinges had kept the castle alive while men had been looking elsewhere, and he had discovered that the work one returns to is the work that teaches you how to keep a thing whole. Merrill lingered. Dragons should never linger. Their nature is forward movement and heats argument. Yet she did, walking in the yard at dawn when the snow chose to fall with small flakes that make sound when they hit leather. She spoke to the dragon in a language that was not words and let it put its head on the ground like a tired ox. She went to the godswood alone twice and came back both times with a quiet in her face that you do not get from sleep. What cost? Hadric asked Kella in the forge on a day the stew had too much salt and the bread had been too ambitious. Everything has a cost, Kella said carefully. Sometimes it is only the cost of attention. Sometimes it is the cost of having your work mean more than your name. Trees do not take coin. They take what you bring that is worth keeping, and if you bring them trash, they return it to you in a wind that takes off your hat. You brought good work. The tree will keep it. Later, when you come with some foolish thing, it will remember and take easy mercy. That is one cost. And the dragon? Dragons think of cost as a story to be told later when they are bored. They take what work tells them to take. This one took pride. It is less full of itself for a little while. It was good for it. Hadric watched the blade on the wall when he had leave to watch and not work. He watched men pass it and forget to puff themselves up. He watched women look at it as if it were a dress in a color they had not considered and might now consider. He watched children whisper under it the way they whisper under banners. The blade was becoming its own story without a name, and that pleased him more than he expected it would. On a night when the sky refused to cloud and the stars were like nails in a lid, he walked the outer wall until his ears burned. Merrill joined him without cloak or apology and stood with him where the wind drops just enough to make speech possible without shouting. Vesperix moved on the downs like a piece of night that had decided it was tired of being a shadow and wanted to be a creature again. "You will go," he said, not making it a question. "I will," she said. "There are fires elsewhere that have not yet learned to be grace. I have cousins who think the world is still only a mouth they need to feed. The South is a love letter written by the vain to their own faces. I must go write something rude in the margins where they can see it." "And the North?" he asked. "What do we get for our trouble?" "You get precisely what you made," she said. "A blade that remembers frost as well as flame. A lesson in how to ask a tree and a beast for help without becoming those who rely on miracles. A memory written into your yard that says you were practical enough to be audacious. And she looked at him as if weighing a nail. "I get the knowledge that my fire made something that does not belong to my name. That will sober me later when I need it." He wanted to ask her for a thing. He did not. He had learned slowly, and then all at once that wanting is a weak sort of hammer. He stood with her until the wind insisted he count his fingers and find them freezing. She left without ceremony, because ceremony belongs to endings and endings invite the wrong kinds of eyes. When Vesperix took the air the next morning, the whole of Winterfell went out to stand in the yard and look up like fools and were not sorry. The dragon beat cold out of the day and burned a small cloud to understand more fully what it was to be a thing that could make such choices. Meryl raised a hand that had never begged anyone. She looked down at Hadric and at Cerise and at the godswood and at the quiet blade on the wall. She did not smile. She did not need to. The dragon turned south. In a long-waited line, in the quiet after, Hadric turned the new blade over in his hands once more. There in the forge where fire had thought it the most interesting thing in the room for a week, he saw new flaws and new strengths the way one does when one allows the eye to be honest. He marked where the hilt would want to wear with years. He measured the guard in his mind and considered who would hold it and with what kind of anger and for how long he could stand to watch. Lady Cerise came to stand across from him at the anvil. She put a hand near the blade and did not touch. Her nails were clean. Her eyes clearer than anyone's had a right to be after 3 winters or 2 children or any number of years in a stone house with men who would prefer the world be simpler. "We have done a thing," she said, and it was not pride. It was inventory. There will be those who will sing of it and make it larger than it was. There will be those who will say we stole fire and so deserve the punishment given to those who steal fire. Let them. We will go on with our lists. I thank you. He bowed his head and felt foolish and felt right. My lady, choose the hand that will carry it, she said. Do not make me do that. I sit in rooms that require different choices. Let this be one your hands make. Choose a hand that knows how to hold a thing without making it into the only thing it holds. He thought of men who would step forward and of women who would not. He thought of the wolf. He thought of hinges again. I will look, he said. Not quickly. Do nothing quickly, she agreed. Winter is the only thing that arrives faster when invited. Ronald came later with his pages bound into neatness and a smug pen. He had decided on 3 titles for what would be his chapter and argued with himself about which would offend the least and impress the middlemost. Kella put her stones back into her basket because stones like to travel too, and she liked to oblige a good stone. The saboteur was let out with a sack of poor winter apples and a promise never to tell anyone in Wintertown he had been brave. He left without looking back, the way men do when they are tired of seeing themselves the way a place has decided to see them. That night, snow came in earnest, thick like a second roof. The blade in the hall looked different under that light, a thing lit from above by cold. Hadric stood under it for a time long enough to be accused of idleness and did not care. He watched it until his shoulders lowered and his teeth unclenched. He did not speak to it. He thought of the cost and found that the cost had been patience, which is not much if you already carry it, and blood, which is much and less all at once depending on how you measure such things. He dreamed of the godswood again and woke less tired than he had any right to be. He supposed he would have to teach some other pair of hands the peculiar demands the steel had made and the peculiar mercies the tree had given, because if a thing is not taught it is lost. He went to the yard and watched boys make poor decisions with sticks that they pretended were swords and girls make better decisions with nothing at all that they pretended were knives. He did not choose yet. He had promised not to be quick. When the sun burned blue for an hour around noon and then decided to be a coin under cloud, he returned to the forge and took up a hinge because doors would always need tending. He worked until the rhythm became him again, this old beat that told you where you were in relation to fire and stone and breath. He thought that everything in Winterfell was a hinge of a kind, the bridge between cold and hot, between old and young, between what is broken and what is not, and that perhaps his work was just a way of bearing that hinge work with a little grace. He did not yet know that the blade would require another ritual, one neither of dragon nor of tree but of wolf. He did not know that a boy with a scar along his jaw would come to him with a quiet in his voice and a way of walking that suggested he had learned to step around rocks in the dark. He did not know that the blade would sing when that boy held it and refuse when a man with a banner reached for it. He did not know that men in the South would come with soft boots and large purses and seek to buy what cannot be bought, and that the snow would be happy to swallow their horses. He did not know that the saboteur would return with a better heart and a worse plan, and that one would cancel the other. He knew only how long to hold a bar in heat, and when to strike, and when to stay his hand and listen. Vesperix's shadow returned to the yard twice in that winter, and once more the following spring, brief and high and disinterested. Meryl did not come down. It was enough to know that she had not been eaten by her own fire. Ronald's book got the arrangement of the plates wrong, and Hadric did not tell him because books are allowed 1 or 2 lies in exchange for writing down truths men would otherwise forget. Cerise aged the way a blade ages, taking polish well, learning where rust might want to start. Kella sat by the pool with her boots off when the first thaw taught the water how to move, and she clucked at tadpoles as if they were boys. The gods would grew a new root where the heat had kissed it, a thick loop like a sleeping snake, and men began to step over it as if they had always done so. The heart tree's eyes did not soften, but once in a while a gust would bring the leaves down in a small red hush when Hadric walked under it, and he let that be his benediction because he was not another kind of man. He cleaned his tools with more care after that, as if remembering to be polite even to iron. He spoke to the bellows when they squeaked. He stopped one afternoon and turned his head because he thought he had heard a voice. It was only wind and a stone learning to sit with another stone. He laughed at himself, not unkindly, and in the forge, under the skin of fire and soot, the reforged blade waited without impatience, patterns folded like snow lying obedient under moonlight. A seam that could not be seen unless you knew exactly where to look, its purpose unspent, its memory broadened to include a tree, a dragon, and a bastard's hands. It was a good beginning for a thing whose work would be to choose the right endings.